By midnight, Caleb Voss had lost a $12 million company, a political marriage, and the protection of every dangerous man in Chicago because he once told Evelyn Hart she was too chubby to stand beside him. Now he was on his knees in the old Voss warehouse, soaked in sprinkler rain, his ruined tuxedo clinging to him like a confession, while Matteo DeLuca watched him beg for mercy without raising his voice. The gun Caleb had pressed near Evie's temple lay across the wet concrete, kicked out of reach. The white wedding gowns he had tried to burn hung behind him in smoking, ruined strips. And Evie Hart still stood, not hidden, not shrinking. Her large, soft body was wrapped in a black dress, soaked dark against her curves. Her presence so full and steady that every armed man in the warehouse had no choice but to look at the woman Caleb had once treated like an embarrassment. She was breathing hard, one hand gripping a silver drive, the other still holding the sewing shear she had used to cut a terrified girl free. Caleb's voice cracked. "Please, Matteo, I'll give you everything. Just don't hand me over to Moretti." The silence after that was worse than a gunshot. Matteo did not answer him. His black suit was wet, his dark hair dripping, his bodyguards standing behind him like shadows carved out of violence. He looked past Caleb first, not at the proof, not at the money trail, but at Evie. That was what made the room understand something had changed. This was not just a mafia boss punishing a traitor. This was a man watching the woman everyone had underestimated hold his empire's missing piece in her hand. Caleb had once known exactly where to cut her deepest. He had made her feel too wide for restaurants, too soft for photographs, too heavy for love that could be introduced in daylight. But tonight, under broken warehouse lights and falling water, her body did not apologize for occupying space. It had blocked fire. It had broken his balance. It had refused to be moved, erased, or burned out of the room. Matteo took one slow step forward, and Caleb flinched like the floor itself had turned against him. "You want mercy?" Matteo said quietly. Caleb nodded too fast. "Yes, please." Matteo's gaze moved to the drive in Evie's hand. "Then ask the woman whose body you mocked, whose labor you used, and whose eyes found what my men missed." Caleb turned toward Evie, finally forced to look up at the woman he had spent years looking down on. His mouth opened, but no clean sentence came out. Evie looked at the wet drive, at the burning gowns, at the man who had once called her too much to be chosen. Her fingers tightened once, then steadied. Because none of this had started with a gun, or a warehouse, or a mafia war. It had started 72 hours earlier with a charcoal gray vest, a broken seam, and a room full of people who thought a woman like Evie Hart could be ignored. 72 hours earlier, Evie Hart was standing under bridal lights with a mouth full of pins, trying not to react while a room of wealthy women decided whether her body made her invisible or offensive. At Hartwell Bridal Atelier, Evie Hart was not the woman anyone imagined in white. She was the woman kneeling beside mirrored platforms, smoothing silk over brides half her size, her large, soft figure impossible to ignore in the narrow-fitting rooms and still treated like something that should move quietly through the back door. Her pale arms were strong from lifting garment bags. Her hips brushed the edges of rolling racks. And every time she crossed the showroom, conversations dipped for half a second before pretending they had not. That was how polite cruelty worked. It smiled while measuring where you did not belong. "Can we get an actual consultant?" one bride whispered that morning, staring at Evie through the mirror instead of at her own dress. Her mother gave a thin little laugh. "Someone who understands the look we're paying for." Evie felt the old wound open, the same one Caleb Voss had left when he told her he needed a woman who photographed better beside ambition. But her face stayed calm. She lowered her eyes to the bodice, adjusted two hidden seams, and pulled the waistline into balance with such clean precision that the bride's reflection changed instantly. The room went quiet in the uncomfortable way people did when the person they had dismissed became necessary. No one apologized. Evie did not ask them to. Asking had never made people kinder. Skill did. Survival did. By noon, she had carried 4 couture gowns up the service stairs because the front elevator was reserved for clients, even though her feet ached and the plastic garment straps cut red lines into her fingers. A junior stylist named Marissa watched her pass and murmured, "Careful with those. They're worth more than your car." Evie stopped just long enough for Marissa's smile to weaken. "Then you should be relieved I'm the one holding them," she said, softly enough to sound professional, sharply enough to make the room listen. In the alteration room, with steam rising from the press and chalk dust on her black dress, Evie finally exhaled. Fabric was honest in ways people were not. A bride could lie about why the zipper no longer closed. A groom could laugh with his fiancée while another woman's perfume clung to his collar. Thread remembered pressure. Silk remembered hands. Just before closing, a rush garment arrived in a black box from Voss and Vale Menswear. Caleb's company name stamped in silver across the lid. Evie's fingers went still. Inside lay a charcoal gray vest, expensive, immaculate, and wrong. The inner lining had been opened before, then re-sewn with thread half a shade too dark, the stitches rushed by someone who knew money but not tailoring. Evie ran her thumb over the seam and felt a thin, unnatural stiffness hidden beneath the canvas. Before she could examine it, Marissa appeared in the doorway, face suddenly pale. "VIP appointment. Front room. And Evie, please don't crowd them unless they ask. These men aren't regular clients." Evie folded the vest over her arm, hiding the damaged lining beneath her palm. When she stepped into the showroom, the whispering died. Two bodyguards in black suits stood by the entrance. Behind them, Matteo De Luca entered without raising his voice, without looking impressed by anything money could buy. His eyes moved past the brides, past the consultants, past every woman trying to become smaller under his attention, and stopped on Evie's hand pressing against the vest. Not on her, sized the way others had. On the seam she was hiding. For one dangerous second, Evie understood that the most feared man in the room had just noticed her noticing something no one else had seen. Matteo De Luca noticed her noticing, and the air inside Hartwell Bridal Atelier changed before he said a single word. It was not dramatic at first. No gun came out. No one shouted. But the owner, Mrs. Hartwell, lowered her eyes as if someone had placed a blade against her throat, and every consultant in the showroom suddenly remembered how to stand still. Matteo was a white Sicilian-American man in a black wool coat, broad-shouldered and quiet, with the kind of face that looked carved for confession rooms and closed caskets. Behind him stood two bodyguards who never touched their weapons because they did not have to. Their silence did the work. Evie kept the vest folded over her arm, her thumb pressed against the wrong seam. She felt the entire room looking at her again, but this time the judgment had sharpened. She was too large for their delicate showroom, too soft and heavy beside glass cases of pearl veils, too visibly working class in her black alteration dress with chalk dust on the hem. Marissa's smile tightened. "Evie, you can leave that with me," she said, reaching for the garment as if Evie's hands were not careful enough for expensive men. "VIP clients don't need alterations, staff hovering." A small, ugly silence followed, the kind that let everyone agree without admitting it. Evie's face did not move, but heat rose beneath her skin. She had spent years being moved out of photographs, out of front rooms, out of men's futures. Still, she held the vest steady. "It was brought to alterations," she said, "so I'm altering it." One of Matteo's bodyguards glanced at her, surprised by the softness of her voice and the steel under it. Matteo did not look away from her hand. "Let her speak," he said. 3 words. Mrs. Hartwell went pale. Marissa stepped back, so quickly her heel hit the mirrored platform. Even the bride, near the window, stopped pretending to check her phone. That was the first real demonstration of Matteo's power Evie ever saw. Not violence, but obedience arriving before fear had time to show its face. Matteo walked toward the fitting table, slow enough that everyone could understand he owned the seconds. "That vest came from Voss and Vale," he said. It was not a question. Evie felt Caleb's company name like a bruise pressed on her ribs. "Yes, and you saw something wrong." Evie looked down at the lining. She could have lied. People like her survived by knowing when not to be the smartest person in the room. But the seam beneath her thumb had been opened with haste, and the thread was not just mismatched. It carried a faint gray residue, the kind used in old industrial chalk, not the clean white marking pencil from Hartwell. More importantly, the garment tag had been steamed loose and reattached half an inch lower, as if someone had hidden a second label beneath it and then panicked. She ran one finger over the inside edge, careful, professional, almost tender. Someone opened it after it left the original tailor, she said. They tried to make it look like a standard repair, but they pulled against the grain. Whoever did it was nervous. Mateo's eyes narrowed, almost imperceptibly. Not at the vest. At her. Like he had expected fear and found evidence. Nervous about what? Evie looked up at him then, aware of her own body filling the space between the table and the mirrors, aware that every woman in the room had gone quiet because the man they feared was listening to the woman they had dismissed. I don't know yet, she said, and guessing would be dangerous. Something moved across Mateo's face, too small to call approval and too dangerous to call interest. He reached for the vest, but Evie's hand closed slightly around the fabric before she could stop herself. One bodyguard shifted. The room inhaled. Mateo paused, his gaze dropping to her fingers, then back to her eyes. Instead of taking it from her, he said, "Then don't guess." Before Evie could answer, the front bell chimed. A bright female laugh cut through the tension, polished and cruel, followed by a man's voice Evie had once loved enough to believe. Caleb Voss stepped into the showroom with Brielle Whitmore on his arm, saw Evie holding his vest in front of Matteo DeLuca, and smiled like he had just found something weak enough to break. Caleb Voss stepped into the showroom with Brielle Whitmore on his arm, saw Evie holding his vest in front of Matteo DeLuca, and smiled like the past had given him permission to hurt her in public. Brielle glittered beside him in a cream designer suit, all sharp bones, diamonds, and practiced indifference, the kind of woman rich men chose when they wanted applause instead of intimacy. Her eyes moved over Evie's body slowly, from the chalk dust on her black alteration dress to the soft heaviness of her hips pressing against the fitting table, and her mouth curved before she said a word. The room felt it. The consultants leaned back. The bride near the window looked away too late. Caleb's smile widened. "Evie," he said, warm enough to sound cruel. "Still working behind the mirrors, I see." Evie kept the vest folded over her arm. Her fingers tightened once around the fabric, then relaxed. "Your garment needed repair." "My garment needed discretion," Caleb replied, stepping closer. "Not a scene." He looked at Mateo as if trying to reclaim control with charm, but Mateo did not return the performance. He stood silent, dark eyes watching Caleb the way a butcher watched meat about to tell him where the bone was. Brielle gave a small laugh. "Caleb, you didn't tell me your ex worked here." The word ex landed like a dropped glass. Marissa's eyes flashed with interest. Mrs. Hartwell went rigid. Evie felt the room rearrange itself around her shame, hungry for the shape of it. Caleb sighed theatrically, as if burdened by mercy. "I didn't think it mattered. Evie and I were a long time ago." Then he lowered his voice just enough to pretend kindness, and made sure everyone heard. She wanted a life that didn't fit her. Some women don't understand that love isn't the same as being presentable. The showroom went so quiet Evie could hear steam hissing in the back room. Her throat tightened, but she did not drop her eyes. That was the sentence beneath all his other sentences. Not just that she was too big, that she was too much to be chosen where people could see. Brielle tilted her head, smiling at Evie through the mirror. "That must have been difficult for you," she said. "Making suits for the kind of men who eventually marry women they can actually take into a ballroom." A cruel little breath moved through the consultants. Not quite laughter, not quite shock. Evie's pulse hit hard once, then steadied. She had altered wedding gowns for women who would never invite her through the front door. She had made men look powerful while they treated her hands like tools. She knew how to stand still while someone tried to turn her body into evidence against her. "The vest is still wrong," she said quietly. Caleb's expression flickered. "Give it to me." He reached for it. Mateo's right hand shifted on the edge of the fitting table, barely a movement, but both bodyguards straightened. Caleb noticed and changed tactics, smiling again. "Careful, Evie. You always did confuse attention with importance." That one hit deeper. For half a second, her hand trembled against the charcoal wool. Then her thumb slid over the open seam and found the unnatural stiffness again, flatter than a button, sharper than interfacing. Caleb saw her feel it. His face lost color. Evie lifted her eyes to Matteo, and this time the mafia boss was not looking at the vest. He was looking at her, as if the entire room had underestimated the wrong woman. Caleb stepped close enough that his sleeve brushed her wrist and hissed, "Don't embarrass yourself again." Evie did not move back. She turned the vest slightly under the chandelier light, saw a thin silver edge hidden beneath the lining, and said, calm enough to make Caleb panic, "Then tell me why your suit is carrying something sewn where no tailor would ever put it. Then tell me why your suit is carrying something sewn where no tailor would ever put it," Evie said, and the sentence turned every mirror in the showroom into a witness. Caleb's hand shot toward the vest before anyone could breathe. He was fast, fueled by panic and entitlement, but Evie did not flinch backward the way he expected. She planted her feet, the full weight of her body settling into the marble like a locked door, and when his fingers grabbed for the fabric, her hip and shoulder blocked him with a force so quiet and immovable that he stumbled half a step instead of taking it from her. A shocked sound moved through the room. Not laughter this time. Not pity. Surprise. Caleb's face twisted. "Give me my property." Evie looked at his hand clamped around the edge of the vest, then at his eyes. "You brought it to my table," she said. "That made it my work." Her voice was low, but something in it made even Brielle stop smiling. Matteo DeLuca did not move, yet his bodyguards looked at each other as if a rule had shifted without being spoken. Evie turned to the cutting table, laid the vest flat, and reached for her small silver seam ripper. Her fingers were steady now. The trembling had passed into focus. She had spent years opening dresses without leaving a scar, rescuing ruined gowns before rich women knew they were ruined, fixing men's jackets so they could stand taller while pretending their power was natural. This was fabric. Fabric did not intimidate her. Caleb did, or he used to. "Evie," he warned, softer, uglier. "You're making yourself look desperate." Her hand paused only once. The word desperate slid under her skin, where all his old words lived. Too big, too emotional, too much. But then her thumb found the wrong thread again, and the old wound became a point of pressure, not a weakness. "No," she said. "I'm making a clean cut." She slid the seam ripper beneath the lining and opened it with surgical precision. The room leaned into spite itself. Marissa covered her mouth. Mrs. Hartwell whispered something that died before becoming a prayer. Beneath the charcoal silk was a narrow pocket no tailor would build, sealed with adhesive and heat. Evie used tweezers from her kit to pull out a wafer-thin silver drive, no larger than a collar stay. Caleb went gray. Brielle stepped away from him so quickly her diamond bracelet clicked against the glass case. For 1 second, nobody looked at Evie's body as something misplaced. They looked at her hands, her calm, her competence. The woman they had tried to move into the background had just taken control of the only object in the room that mattered. Matteo extended one hand. Evie placed the drive in his palm, and the brief brush of their fingers was colder than romance and more dangerous than praise. He handed it to one of his men without taking his eyes off Caleb. A small encrypted reader appeared from a bodyguard's coat. The screen lit blue, then black, then filled with shipping codes, account initials, port schedules, and one name that made Matteo's jaw tighten almost invisibly: Dante Moretti. Caleb lunged again, not at Matteo, not at the bodyguard, but at Evie, because cowards always reached for the person they thought the room would forgive them for hurting. This time Matteo's hand rose an inch, and both bodyguards stepped between them like a wall. Evie did not hide behind them. She stayed beside the table, breathing hard, her large soft frame still square to Caleb, still refusing to make herself smaller. Matteo looked from the screen to the open vest, then finally to Evie, and the silence changed texture. He was no longer merely observing her. He was recalculating her. "Miss Hart," he said, each word controlled enough to frighten everyone listening. "Can you tell me who opened that lining?" "Miss Hart," Matteo said, each word controlled enough to frighten everyone listening. Can you tell me who opened that lining? Evie felt every eye return to her at once, but this time the weight of the room had changed. They were no longer looking at her like a woman who took up too much space near beautiful things. They were looking at her like a locked door might speak. Caleb gave a sharp, ugly laugh. She can't tell you anything. She's a seamstress with a grudge. Brielle's face was pale now, but she still managed to whisper, "This is absurd." Evie did not answer either of them. She looked at the open vest, at the cut thread curling like a black vein against the lining, and forced her breathing to slow. Her hands wanted to shake, not from fear of being wrong, but from the old terror of being correct in a room that wanted her humiliated anyway. "Not from the outside," she said. No, Mateo's gaze sharpened. "Explain." "One word. No comfort. No rescue. A test." Evie respected him more for that than she wanted to. She stepped closer to the fitting table, her large, soft body steady beneath the showroom lights, refusing to fold inward while Caleb watched for weakness. The original stitch is machine finished. Clean tension, consistent spacing. Whoever reopened it used hand thread and pulled too hard near the lower seam. That means they were rushing or afraid of being interrupted. She turned the vest slightly, showing the room the line no one had cared to see. Hartwell uses white tailor's chalk. This residue is gray, waxy, industrial. Voss and Vale uses it on dark wool because it brushes off under steam. Caleb's jaw clenched before he could stop it. Mateo saw it. So did Evie. That tiny betrayal of muscle was louder than a confession. Marissa lowered her eyes. Mrs. Hartwell backed away from Caleb as if shame could spread by proximity. The bride near the window whispered, "Oh my God," and then covered her mouth. Evie kept going, not triumphant, not cruel, just precise. The tag was removed and reattached lower than the factory placement. Someone needed access beneath it. Whoever did this knew the suit, but not well enough to hide the repair from someone who lives with seams all day. Mateo's expression did not soften, but something in his attention did. It settled on her with weight. Caleb stepped forward again. "She's inventing this because I left her." "Ask her why I left, Mateo. Ask her how she begged me not to choose someone who belonged in my world." A silence opened around Evie, deep and vicious. Her throat tightened, but she did not look away. "You left because you were embarrassed by me," she said quietly. "That doesn't make the stitching match." For the first time, the room did not laugh. It listened. Mateo placed one hand on the table between Caleb and Evie, not touching her, not claiming her, but creating a boundary every dangerous person in the room understood. "Step back from her," he said. Caleb froze. The protection was subtle, almost invisible, but Evie felt it like a door closing between her body and the man who had spent years believing he could still reach her pain. Mateo turned to his bodyguard. "Run the drive. Quietly. Then lock every account tied to Voss and Vale until I know how deep this goes." Caleb's face drained. "You can't do that." Mateo did not blink. Already did. A phone vibrated in the nearest guard's hand before anyone could move. He glanced down, and his posture changed. "Boss," he said, voice low. Message came through an encrypted channel. "Moriarty's people know the drive is out. They sent a photo of Miss Hart leaving the back entrance yesterday." The room went cold. Evie's breath stopped for half a second. Mateo looked at the phone, then at her, and the calculation in his eyes turned darker, more personal, more dangerous. "Miss Hart," he said, "you are not going home alone tonight." "You are not going home alone tonight," Mateo said, and the words hit the showroom harder than any threat Caleb had made. Evie felt the room turn toward her again, but the shape of their attention had changed. Marissa was no longer watching a plus-size seamstress overstep her place. Mrs. Hartwell was no longer worried about presentation. Even Brielle, pale beneath her perfect makeup, stared as if Evie had crossed some invisible velvet rope and nobody knew how to drag her back. Caleb laughed once, thin and panicked. "You can't seriously be taking her with you." Mateo did not look at him. "I wasn't asking you." One of the bodyguards opened the side entrance, revealing the alley beyond and the black armored SUV waiting with its engine alive. Evie looked at Mateo's hand, not touching her, merely indicating the way out. That restraint mattered. Men had tried to move her body all her life with shame, with jokes, with sighs, with narrow chairs and smaller expectations. Mateo moved the room around her instead. Still, Evie did not step forward. "I'm not going anywhere as your prisoner," she said quietly. The bodyguards froze. Caleb's mouth opened, ready to enjoy her mistake. Mateo turned back. His eyes were dark, unreadable, and close enough now that she could see the faint scar along his jaw. "No," he said. "You're going as the only person in this room who noticed what my men missed." The sentence did something dangerous to the silence. It did not crown her. It did not soften the threat, but it placed value where humiliation had been standing. Evie lifted her chin, her large, soft frame steady under every gaze, refusing to fold herself into gratitude. "Then I need my kit." Mateo glanced at the silver case beside the cutting table. "Bring it." A bodyguard reached for it, but Evie stepped in first, her hip brushing the table, her hand closing around the handle with quiet ownership. "I carry my own tools." For 1 second, something almost like satisfaction moved through Mateo's expression. Then it vanished. In the armored SUV, forced into the dangerous intimacy of leather seats, tinted glass, and men speaking into earpieces, Evie sat across from Mateo, with her sewing kit on her lap like a weapon. The city slid by in black reflections. His knee was inches from hers, his presence cold and controlled, but he did not crowd her. He gave orders in fragments. Close the north docks. Pull Voss contracts. Find more Eddie's Taylor. Every command made another invisible wall move somewhere in Chicago. Evie listened, then looked at the tablet in the guard's hand. "That route is wrong," she said. The guard blinked. Mateo's eyes lifted. "Why?" Evie pointed to a list of deliveries from Voss and Vale. "Luxury suits don't go through a meat distributor on Halstead unless someone wants them logged as cold storage. Fabric hates moisture. No legitimate tailor would risk wool that way." The guard looked to Mateo, uncertain. Mateo took the tablet and passed it to Evie instead. A small trust, but the car felt it. "Show me." Evie marked 3 shipments with one steady finger. Her body filled the seat, warm and undeniable against the cold black interior. Not hidden, not apologetic, not decorative. Mateo watched her trace the lie through invoices and fabric routes, and his voice lowered. "You understand what this means?" "It means Caleb's company isn't just hiding one drive," she said. "It means someone used tailoring deliveries to move information all over your city." Before Mateo could answer, his phone lit up. A photo appeared on the screen. Hartwell Bridal Atelier's back room. Lights smashed, mannequins overturned, and Marissa tied to a chair beneath a rack of burning white gowns. A message followed, short and brutal. "Send the big seamstress to the old Voss warehouse, where the girl burns with the evidence." Mateo's face went still. Evie's fingers tightened around her kit until the metal handle bit into her palm. Then she looked up at him, not begging, not breaking, and said, "If they're burning gowns, they're hiding something in one. If they're burning gowns, they're hiding something in one," Evie said, and Mateo's entire car went silent around her. One bodyguard muttered that the old Voss warehouse should be taken with 6 men and rifles, but Evie shook her head before Mateo could answer. "No, if they see a raid, Marissa dies, and whatever they're trying to erase burns with her." Mateo looked at her across the dark leather seat, his face unreadable except for the muscle ticking once in his jaw. "Then what do you suggest?" Evie looked down at the sewing kit on her lap, at the metal handle biting into her palm, and felt the old familiar terror rise up with a stranger thing underneath it. Purpose. "You sent me in like they asked," she said, "but you let me look before anyone shoots." Nobody liked that. The bodyguards turned. Mateo's eyes went black. "Absolutely not." Evie held his gaze, her large, soft body steady in the armored car, refusing to make herself small even for the most dangerous man in Chicago. "You said I noticed what your men missed. Let me notice this." The old Voss warehouse smelled of smoke, wet concrete, and expensive silk turning to ash. White gowns hung from rusted racks like ghosts, their hems catching flame one by one. Marissa was tied to a chair beneath a flickering security light, mascara streaking her face. No cruelty left in her now, only terror. Caleb stood near her with a pistol shaking in his hand, while two of Moretti's men watched from the shadows. "There she is," Caleb said, voice bright with panic. The big seamstress with the magic fingers. Evie felt the insult land, but it did not move her. The firelight carved her silhouette wide and unmistakable against the smoke, and for once her presence did not feel like a liability. It felt like a barricade. She walked slowly, forcing every eye to follow her instead of Mateo's men slipping through the side entrance behind the smoke. "If you wanted me scared," she said, "you should have picked a room without fabric." Caleb frowned. Evie's eyes moved over the gowns. A thin bridal mannequin in the corner was already burning too fast, cheap foam and old lace. But near the cutting table stood a plus-size mannequin dressed in a heavy ivory wedding gown untouched by flame, its bodice pinned badly, its hem weighted wrong. Her breath caught. No designer wasted steel boning in a display dress. Someone had made that gown heavy on purpose. "Marissa," Evie said softly, "lean left when I tell you." "What?" Caleb snapped. Evie moved, not fast like a fighter, but decisive, using the full strength of her hips and shoulders to slam the cutting table sideways. The metal legs screamed across concrete, knocking one of Moretti's men off balance and blocking the fire's path to Marissa. Caleb shouted. A gun went off into the ceiling. Evie did not stop. She drove her body between Marissa and the sparks, grabbed the industrial steam iron from the table, and smashed it against the sprinkler valve overhead. Water exploded down in a violent silver sheet. Smoke collapsed. The gowns hissed. Mateo's men surged from the side doors, but Mateo himself stayed locked on Evie, trusting her line of sight before his own violence. She cut Marissa's bindings with her shears, then tore open the plus-size gown's inner bodice. Hidden beneath the boning was a second silver drive and a strip of handwritten port codes stamped with Caleb's company seal and Dante Moretti's initials. The room changed. Even Caleb saw it. His face emptied as the proof hung wet and shining in Evie's hand. "You didn't just betray Mateo," she said, voice shaking now, but unbroken. "You used women's bodies, women's dresses, and women's labor to move your secrets because you thought none of us mattered enough to be searched." Mateo stepped through the rain of sprinklers, his black suit soaked, his expression colder than death. Caleb backed away, then lunged, grabbing Evie from behind and pressing the pistol near her temple with a sobbing kind of desperation. "Tell him to let me walk," Caleb screamed, his arm tight around the woman he once claimed was too much to stand beside him. Evie did not drop the drive. She lifted it higher, right where Mateo could see, and the entire warehouse fell into silence, so complete it felt like the first second before an execution. Evie lifted the drive higher, even with Caleb's arm locked around her and the pistol shaking near her temple, because she understood something he still did not. A man who panicked always tightened his grip in the wrong place. "Tell him to let me walk," Caleb screamed again, his breath hot and ragged against her ear. The warehouse was drowned in sprinkler rain, smoke crawling along the ceiling, white gowns hanging wet and ruined behind them. Mateo did not raise his gun. He did not shout. He simply stood in the silver downpour with his eyes fixed on Caleb's hand, and the silence around him became a command every armed man in the room obeyed. "Evie," he said low and controlled. "Breathe." She did, once, slowly. Then she let the full weight of her body drop backward, not collapsing, not fainting, but anchoring herself with the stubborn gravity Caleb had mocked for years. His balance broke. His polished shoes slid on the wet concrete. At the same time, Evie drove her heel down against his foot and twisted her shoulder just enough for the pistol to angle away from her skull. Mateo moved only then. One sharp nod. A bodyguard struck Caleb's wrist with a metal baton, and the gun skittered across the floor before anyone fired. Caleb hit his knees in the water, gasping, empty-handed, while Evie remained standing, soaked, breathing hard, the second drive still clenched in her fist like a crown nobody had thought to look for. For a moment, No one moved. Marissa stared at her from behind the cutting table, shaking, alive because the woman she had mocked had shielded her from fire. One of Moretti's men lowered his weapon first, then the other. Matteo took the drive from Evie's hand with almost unbearable care, as if he were touching proof and pulse at the same time. He plugged it into the encrypted reader. The screen filled with port codes, Voss and Vale transfer logs, payment trails, surveillance stills, and a recorded message of Caleb offering Dante Moretti access to Matteo's dock routes in exchange for protection and a new identity. Caleb's face crumpled before the file even finished playing. "That's edited," he whispered. No one believed him. Matteo turned the screen so every man in the warehouse could see Caleb's company seal, Brielle Whitmore's family trust attached to the laundering accounts, and Moretti's initials beside the shipment dates. Phones began lighting up. Underworld doors closed faster than prison gates. Voss and Vale's accounts were frozen before Caleb could stand. Brielle's father withdrew his backing with a single text. Moretti's men stepped away from Caleb, as if betrayal were contagious. Caleb looked from face to face, searching for one person who still needed him. There was no one. Finally, he crawled toward Matteo through the water, his beautiful tuxedo ruined, his voice breaking into the thing the title had promised from the beginning. "Please," Caleb begged. "Mercy. I'll give you everything. Just don't hand me over to them." Matteo looked at him for a long second, then stepped aside, so Caleb had to face Evie instead. The power shift was so complete the warehouse seemed to hold its breath. Caleb's eyes flicked over her body by reflex, searching for the old insult, the old weakness, the woman he had trained himself to dismiss. But Evie stood there large, soft, soaked in rain and sprinkler water, her black dress clinging to the powerful lines of a body that had refused to be moved, erased, or burned out of the room. He had once told her she was too much to be chosen. Now everyone was waiting for her choice. "You don't get mercy because you finally need it," she said quietly. "You get the truth. That's more than you ever gave me." Matteo's mouth barely moved, but his voice cut through the warehouse like a closing vault. "Caleb Voss is finished. His contracts are mine. His accounts repay the women he used. His name does not open another door in this city." Caleb bowed his head, not out of respect, but because there was nowhere left to look. 3 weeks later, the winter underworld gala began inside the DeLuca casino under chandeliers bright enough to turn black marble into water. Evie entered beside Matteo, not behind him, wearing a deep velvet gown she had designed herself, the fabric embracing every generous curve with deliberate, unapologetic elegance. Conversation stopped, not with cruelty this time, with recognition. Marissa lowered her eyes when Evie passed. Mrs. Hartwell stepped aside without being asked. Former Voss clients waited near the bar, holding contracts they now needed Evie to approve because Matteo had placed the entire luxury tailoring network under her authority. At the head of the room, he pulled out the chair to his right. Not the back, not the corner, the right hand. Then he looked at every capo, banker, lawyer, and socialite who had once mistaken her softness for weakness. "You will bring garment routes, front contracts, and laundering concerns to Miss Hart first," Matteo said. "She sees what powerful men hide from themselves." Evie sat, calm and luminous, her large body no longer an apology in a room built to shrink women like her, but the center of gravity around which the room rearranged itself. Caleb was not there. His empire had been stripped, his engagement dissolved, his circle gone silent. And Evie, the woman he had been too ashamed to love in public, had become the woman no one in Chicago dared overlook again. If this ending gave you chills, like the video, subscribe for more dark mafia romance stories, and tell me in the comments which moment hit hardest. Caleb begging for mercy, or Matteo giving Evie the seat at his right hand.